All right,
Okay.
Maddy, please.
All right. I'll just share my screen here. One moment. Um, all right. And can everyone see that?
Yes, we
Okay.
can.
Thank you. Awesome. All right. So just before I jump into my presentation of jazz dance, I'll just introduce myself a little bit. So my name is Maddy Faunt, and I'm from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, situated on Treaty 7 territory. I'm a third year student at the University of Calgary studying dance and social and cultural anthropology. I'm an aspiring dance artist, choreographer, and future anthropologist. And I have an extensive background playing jazz music, actually, so drums and singing in that, and as well as dance, as I've been dancing since I was 8 years old. So I've been very artistic my whole life. Sorry, I'm just gonna pull this up here. There. Very artistic, and I've always been involved with music and dance. And I did dance outside of my studies at school at a recreational dance studio since I was 8 years old up until high school, which is grade 12 or class 12. Um, and then I decided I wanted to pursue dance in my post-secondary. So I also have a special interest in dance film as well as of recently. So kind of exploring how cultural and anthropology and dance kind of situate themselves and how they relate. And my main area of interest right now is jazz dance. I'm obviously still a student in this topic. So what I've learned and what I'm presenting on today is a work in progress, and it's what I've learned from my mentors and professionals in the field right now. So I've just included a couple or a few pictures here of just some projects I've been involved with. The first one at the top there was a school presentation I was in. And then the middle one there, I actually used to perform at an amusement park throughout high school here in Calgary. And then the bottom one there is another photo from a school performance as well. And so every year I do around probably 3 or 4 performances within my school year as part of my, like, I get graded on them for participation and things like that. So that's just a little bit about me. So without further ado, I'm going to be presenting on the topic of jazz dance today. And so I first wanted to just kind of, before I jump into this topic, I want to acknowledge that I am a guest to this area of study of jazz dance. And I just wanted to read this statement here just to let you know about my position when talking about jazz dance, as it does have a very heavy history. So I, Maddy Faunt, recognize myself as a guest. Sorry, I'm just going to move this. That was a guest to the form that was born out of Black American culture and the African American experience. I recognize my white privilege when confronting topics related to Black American culture and the African American experience, and only hope to learn, educate, and share this beautiful art form with others, as it is a big part of my existence on this earth. I intend on sharing my passion for dance by gathering information from my Black mentors and teachers. Jazz dance and jazz music has made me who I am today, and I owe it all to Black culture and the African American experience. This will start to kind of make sense as I go along and explain the history of where jazz dance has come from. So I'll just go to the next slide here. And so what we will be kind of covering today is, what is jazz dance? Where does it originate from? What is the jazz dance tree of styles and genres? That will make more sense as we go along as well. African aesthetic and cultural appropriation, and then to end off, a summary and questions if you guys have any. And if you have any questions along the way, feel free to stop me as well, or put them in the chat or anything like that. So to move on to what is jazz dance? Well, jazz dance has multiple meanings and styles and expressions that have evolved over the years. So it's a pretty complex topic, I would say. It's pretty hard to nail down one specific definition, as it really does come from a lot of different positions. And so it's made up of a lot of different styles and meanings. There are many different definitions, therefore it makes it hard to pinpoint one exactly. But to kind of summarize it and to begin the conversation, the roots of jazz dance are African, particularly West African. And I'll go on a little bit more about the history in the next slide here, but it was born out of the transatlantic slave trade from Africa. And so this is kind of where it was started. So enslavement played a huge role in the creation of jazz dance. And so we'll discuss that in the next slide here. But during the time of slavery, African dance evolved into African American dance, which was very much influenced by the mixing of different African tribes, cultures, and religions, and restrictions imposed on slaves within the plantations in the US when this was all going on. So with these factors at play, this created the jazz age. So this was kind of an era that started at the beginning of the 1900s. And so at the beginning of the jazz age, a form of jazz dance called vernacular jazz dance was born out of this time. And so vernacular jazz is kind of the original, if you want to think about it. You have like the original vernacular jazz dance style, and before that you have the African roots. And so you have African roots that have now kind of formed into this vernacular style, they call it, which was born out of the slave trade in America. So yeah, within vernacular jazz, it's composed of mainly two forms of jazz dance. This will also become more clear in a couple slides here, but they are called the Lindy Hop and the Charleston. And so these are two forms that emerged out of vernacular jazz through the experiences of African people. They came over and had to go through a bunch of change, hardship. And these are the kind of forms that emerged out of their experiences through the transatlantic slave trade. And so, yeah, the Lindy Hop and the Charleston were and they are still considered a social dance. So meaning you're dancing with other people, it's a social interaction. And they were practiced in mainly jazz clubs and dance halls during the 1920s and 30s. And so all of this will kind of start to make sense as I go to the next slide here, but this is just kind of a very broad general overview to get started. So kind of going back to the origins of jazz dance, so the transatlantic slave trade. Here I have a picture on the left that kind of just describes the flow of what this looked like. So Europeans were coming over to Africa, excuse me, and distributing goods and African slaves, unfortunately. And you can see kind of the arrows of where the slaves were taken. So they first were taken to the Caribbean islands. And then in the purple here, you can see that they were kind of transported to the North America, mainly in the United States. And so this occurred between the 16th and 19th centuries, more towards 19th century for the slaves. But Europeans created this to transport goods and African slaves to the Americas for profit. Incredibly inhumane and damaging to African peoples. And jazz dance and jazz music was born out of this slave experience in the United States and was used and created as a way to resist and survive in their experience. So on the bottom left here, I just have a graphic of what it may have looked like on plantations where African peoples were taken to do work. And then on the right here, this is actually a graphic taken from, I believe, it's a form of dance and music called the ring shout. And it was a form that emerged out of the slave trade as a way to kind of gather without being punished for practicing their culture. So they found a way around the rules that were set upon them by American people. So they created ways to express themselves through music and through dance. And this is kind of how jazz was formed because they weren't allowed to speak their language. They weren't allowed to practice their cultures from Africa. They completely had to totally readjust and figure out a way to get through and survive these terrible times. So they used music to be able to communicate. Specifically, actually, when they were working in some instances, they would have work songs that they would sing to each other to communicate. And this wasn't deemed like this wasn't deemed to be bad, or they weren't punished all the time for doing this. So they found a way around it. So yeah, that's just kind of a general overview, but jazz dance and jazz music was born out of this experience because this was a way to express themselves. And if you listen to a lot of jazz music from the very early period, you'll hear that kind of heaviness in the songs and the lyrics. So I've included a playlist later on in the presentation you can check out as well that has some songs in there. But this is the origins of jazz dance. And so keep this in mind when we kind of get to the end of the presentation, and it'll start to make a little bit more sense, I think, to be able to compare.
Maddy, I think Nafi has a question.
Oh yeah, for sure, go ahead. Is it in the chat or?
Tell me example of jazz music. Can you tell me an example of jazz music?
What's an example of jazz music?
Yeah.
Is that what I heard? So I can actually, I can pop up a video afterwards.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I think the flow is going just perfect. I think later we'll see examples.
For sure, yeah, I have some links posted at the end with some jazz music that we can listen to after. Awesome. So yeah, moving on to the jazz dance tree. So this is a graphic from a textbook that I have. And I think it just really nicely demonstrates all the various different forms and genres that have kind of come out of Africa and the African experience. And so as you can see here, this is a tree. And so the bottom, we have roots here, and it's all saying African dance, African, African. And so that's just demonstrating that it's really birthed out of Africa. And then the European influence comes along through the transatlantic slave trade, and really influences how African people are living their lives and conducting their lives in through this experience. And this is where the vernacular jazz dance comes into play, like I was mentioning before. So the vernacular jazz, composing again of the Lindy Hop and the Charleston. And these are two kind of different dances that you would perform that have come out, these two styles, through the vernacular jazz dance. And as you can see, vernacular is this whole tree trunk here. So this is really the main pillar that has influenced all of these other branches that are coming out here. And so the main steps and the characteristics of jazz movement all comes back to the vernacular. And I should add, the different kind of characteristics of vernacular jazz dance look different in the body. So the way that the body will look like when you're performing a vernacular jazz dance movement is that you're very grounded, your knees are bent, your hips are bent, you're connected to the ground and to the earth. And it's also a very social dance. You're dancing with people, you're connecting with people, and there's not much competition, and you're just enjoying yourself. And so this is kind of the essence of vernacular jazz dance, and some of the characteristics of what you would perform. And so,
Maddy, can I ask a quick question?
For sure.
So when you say vernacular, right? So in our everyday language, when we use the word vernacular, we think it's a sort of different dialect of a language or particular ways of talking, a particular discourse. What exactly you mean by vernacular jazz here?
Yeah, definitely. So vernacular, I would say, is an original form, something that is always kind of consistent. So vernacular jazz meaning when you see someone that is dancing in a vernacular way, you can recognize that that's what it is, because you're noticing, okay, they have bent knees, they're connected to the ground, they're relaxed throughout their body. So this is kind of a dance form that you can identify easily across the board if you're familiar with jazz dance, and it's what's influenced and set up these other styles of dance. So for instance, vernacular jazz could influence tap dance right here, in that in tap dance you would also have bent knees, and you'd also be low to the ground, and so you'd have vernacular characteristics be popping up in these other dance forms here. So this whole trunk here has influenced all of these branches of jazz dance. And so each one of these branches is kind of a genre or a different style that has been influenced or born out of vernacular dance. And they all also correlate to a different era, as well it correlates to different kind of social movements as well that have been born out of that. Tap dance, for instance, was very influenced by Irish immigrants coming over to New York as well. And it was also influenced by African people coming over. So there's just different things all coming together. Like I said at the beginning of the presentation, jazz dance has many different definitions and expressions. So it's very hard to kind of pinpoint one specific thing, but just to keep it simple, like vernacular is the baseline for all of these branches. So it influences all of these styles, and each of one of these branches you could probably spend like hours explaining. So I've decided to kind of really talk about vernacular jazz as it is the foundation. African dance is the main foundation, and then you have vernacular dance that's formed out of that. So I'm choosing to kind of focus on vernacular dance. And then if you go all the way up to the left here, I'm gonna also focus on pop jazz. Just because it is very current right now. And it has evolved a ton, and you'll see it is way different than what vernacular jazz is. So we'll kind of get into that now. But just so you know, the jazz has many different styles and different things that have influenced the styles have made them what they are. So tap dance is what it is because of Irish immigrants coming over and the African aesthetic coming together. And hip hop is what it is due to, let's say, social movements happening in the 90s. So just different things coming out of this. So just keep this in mind as a little bit of a graphic, but the main point here is that vernacular jazz dance and pop jazz are very far from one another, and that'll be evident when you watch the difference between the two. So we'll move on to the next here. So taking that idea of the vernacular, let's move this here. So vernacular right here and pop jazz. So remembering that these are two very far genres from one another on the tree. So talking about pop jazz. So this is very current jazz dance that's being practiced today. And it is strayed very far from the original vernacular form. And you can tell this, especially by watching someone dance, but through these videos, you can tell that they have very long extensions. They're not very close to the ground. They're not very grounded per se. It's very for the purpose of entertainment and less for the connection between people and paying respect, I guess, to the true form of vernacular jazz. It's still a valid form, but it is troublesome at times or problematic at times as well. And I'll get more into that in a minute. And then you have non-commercialized vernacular dance, which is what we were talking about, the foundation that has come from African dance and from Africa. And it is true to the African aesthetic. And so I'll mention African aesthetic a lot throughout this presentation. And basically it's just meaning you can identify that the dance movement has originated from Africa, that it's from traditional African dances. And so in these pictures, you can tell they're low to the ground, they're socializing. It's not so rigid or has to be uniform like this picture over here to the left. So it's very much a community-based form where you're dancing with people, a social form, whereas this commercialized pop jazz that's now being practiced today it's individualistic, and it's very much, you're all also trying to be the same at the same time. So sometimes you will have solo numbers like this, just one person dancing, and then sometimes you'll have a group of people who are all trying to look the same, be the same, and there's not really any room for expression or personal expression. And so these two forms, they contradict each other a lot because one of them is very true to the original vernacular form because it is that, right? And then pop jazz is so far removed. So we'll get into that a little bit here. But yeah, so we're just comparing and seeing kind of the differences between the two. And we'll kind of get into this a little bit more in the next slides. But I don't know if this video will come through for you guys, but here I just have an example of what commercialized pop jazz or competitive jazz dance looks like. And one thing to add to this is the competitive aspect of this. So right now, currently, if you're a dancer, you can either dance competitively in North America, at least, or recreationally. I danced recreationally. I didn't do competition, but a lot of the time competition dance is very motivated by money, obviously, and kind of, what's the word? Almost selling dances and selling classes to children so that they can make more money. Because to be able to be in a competitive dance class, you have to be enrolled in many different classes to be worthy enough of doing a competition. So this is kind of where pop jazz has gone because it's catering to this competitive jazz dance. And so you'll see in the video, a lot of their movement is very removed from the vernacular form. You will see bent knees and things like that, but it's not the same in that they're not totally grounded and they're not connecting to the earth and to each other. And it's very much for the purposes of entertainment and competition between each other. So I'll just play a little bit here. I won't play the whole thing as it is pretty long, but just to give you guys an idea. So again, very uniform here.
Till death do us part.
See much of that, but it was mostly comprising of tricks as well. So with the competition in dance right now, a lot of it is having to do with who can do the most tricks, who can show off the most, how are we going to entertain the most. There's also some sexualization in there, which is also very toxic for children. So just competitive dance can be very problematic. I'm not saying that that pop jazz isn't a valid form. I think it definitely still can be in the right setting. But just to give you an example of how far pop jazz has gone from the original roots of African dance and vernacular dance is quite, it's crazy. So that's just to give you a little example. Another thing I want to point out is that the music isn't authentic jazz music. That is kind of, the music that was playing was kind of everyday pop music that you would hear. And so it's also not respecting or paying tribute to original jazz music. So that's just to give you an example of what commercialized pop jazz looks like. In the next slide, I will show you what vernacular jazz looks like. And this is, again, the baseline, the original form of jazz, which has influenced all these other genres. And so there are two different styles, the Lindy Hop and the Charleston. In this video, I'm showing you the Lindy Hop, and it's just a style of vernacular dance. And so yes, I'll show you, this is from a movie, but it'll just give you a good idea. Some things you can look for are the bent knees, the connection with one another, the connection to earth, and just things like that. So just see if you can kind of pinpoint or pick out those kind of African aesthetics within the movement as well. And I'm just going to forward a little bit because the dancing starts a bit later. Here we go. So that's just an example of where you're seeing the African aesthetic come through, where you're seeing those original movements come through of the bent knees, the relaxed shoulders, the connection with one another. And you might say like, that looked pretty acrobatic too. Like there were some tricks in there and things like that. But the context isn't the same. They're doing that to have fun with each other and to connect with each other. And those movements have been kind of born out of the African-American experience. So those are original, true dance movements to keep in mind. So it is unfortunately a dying art form that is highly unrepresented in today's dance world. And this is why I'm so passionate about talking about this, is because this history about jazz dance is getting lost, and it's not being appreciated or incorporated into today's dance performances and dance classes like it should be to preserve the art form. So just moving on to the next slide, I'm just going to talk about the African aesthetic within jazz dance and how cultural appropriation can come into play with that. And so for those who may not know, cultural appropriation is when a culture isn't appreciated, or it is taken without permission and it is modified, or someone profits off of it and doesn't properly represent it or pay respects to where it's needed. So this can often happen in jazz dance, as you can see, because when you start out with a vernacular dance form, and it's morphed and changed so much to be like pop jazz, you can see the disconnect between the two. And you can see kind of the disregard for the history that's gone through time. And so where you can kind of run into issues with this in the dance world, and where I've seen it, is dance teachers providing jazz classes, but not doing their research in trying to understand the history of jazz dance. And then they're taking their classes and giving them labels that aren't necessarily correct or authentic. And then they're profiting off of those because they're making money, and people don't know better because they're not educated in what the true form of jazz dance really is. And so it's important to acknowledge the connection between the dances of traditional African cultures and the history of jazz dances of Black Americans, because that's where it's originated from, right? And many don't acknowledge this, or they're uneducated about the connection. So this can lead to cultural appropriation, whether it's intended or not. And you can find that also in the movement. So someone can take a movement, let's say of an African dance, a specific African dance movement, and then put a completely different label on it, and then kind of claim it as their own. And so then they go, let's say, and they perform this movement and they make profit off of this. And so that can run into issues, right? Sorry, Rushta, did you have a question?
Sorry, by movement, Are you talking about like movement, kind of like dance moves?
Yes, sorry. So yeah, physical movement. So let's say like this, something is a traditional African movement. If someone takes this same movement, makes a dance piece with it, sells tickets, people buy the tickets, then they're making a profit off of something that's not appropriate. It's not theirs to do that. Or if they wanted to do it properly, they definitely still could, but they would have to put the time into understanding the history and acknowledging the history with it. And so this is a huge issue in the field of dance. And it also
Maddy,
is, yeah,
Maddy, could I add something, another example, just to
sure.
contextualize for many of the students here? So, for
Yeah.
instance, the yoga has
Mhm. Yeah,
emerged out of South
definitely.
Asia, and it's 5,000 years of Vedic philosophy and in all of that. And yoga is not essentially something that is confined within the body of people's exercise. So it's not about how flexible you can be only. It's much
Mhm.
more than that. But when it is sold in the Western world, oh, if you do yoga, then you will attain certain desired body shape, and therefore, here is $5,000, and but the original evolution of yoga had nothing to do with capitalist co-option at all whatsoever.
Yeah. No, that's a great example. That's exactly, yeah, what I'm talking here. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, this is a huge issue in the field of dance. And not only within dance, but it's also just important that the general population knows this as well, in case you decide to go take a jazz dance class, or you enroll your children in jazz dance classes, or you go see a performance. It's just important to um, understand the history and what's authentic before you go and spend your money on these things or participate in these things or put times towards them. So those are just some of the ethical and economic implications of this. But as you can see, these top two pictures here are traditional African dances. And obviously the one on the bottom isn't, but you can tell the vast difference between the two. And these are apparently still called both jazz dance. I mean, these two are African dances, but African roots have, influenced jazz dance. And so it's just interesting, I find, to see how far removed this pop jazz and commercialized jazz dance has come, and how blind people are to the fact that there is a huge history behind it. And it is very important that you understand it before you do participate in it. So yeah, that is that slide. I have a quick summary here just to kind of go over what we've talked about, and then we can head into questions if anybody has any. But so jazz dance is rooted obviously in the African aesthetic. It was born out of Africa. Jazz dance was born out of the transatlantic slave trade. There are many genres, like we saw on the tree, many different ways that you can classify jazz dance. As jazz dance evolves throughout time, we need to be aware of cultural appropriation and educating ourselves on these topics before we participate in them. And the conservation of vernacular jazz, so the original form of jazz dance, is crucial in maintaining an accurate historical dialogue and maintaining the history behind this. So that's my presentation for all of that. And if you guys have any questions, I'd love to hear them. And we can also listen to some jazz music too here in a second. So yeah, if you can unmute or put it in the chat if you have any questions.
I think some of them, they have questions. They can maybe if you stop sharing the screen now, they'll be
Sure.
able to see all of them together.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. There we go.
So yeah, I think
Okay.
Nafi had question, then Novo had question. I think many of them have questions. So Nafi, what was the question you wanted to ask?
I wanted to ask the question, but she answered it already.
Okay, all right. So Novo, what's your question?
My question was that people doesn't know when people thinks about jazz, when the jazz word comes to their mind. They usually think about something cool, something awesome, but they don't think about history, that it came from the African history. So when they're going to the jazz school to learn jazz dance, like what about the teachers that they have been taught to, right? The teachers that the teachers that he's teaching the students jazz dance. So doesn't he or she knows about the jazz history? Like how will they get the true like original education of the jazz music? It's not their fault that they don't know it. Like no one
Right.
talks about it. No one talks about the jazz dance of history. So when you think about it, it's not actually their fault that they don't know about the history. it's actually that people don't talk about it. People doesn't want to talk about it. And when we saw the jazz, like the presentation, I loved it. And also the thing that when I saw the presentation, I was seeing that the black people were trying to make people understand through the dance. They're trying to show their emotion through the dance and how you're feeling about the history. But the people nowadays, they're showing that they're being competitive. They're
Mhm.
competing against each other. So how are we going to help them? How can we help them, like through schools of jazz dance schools?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Thank you. Um, yeah, it is very difficult for sure, especially when you look at Calgary, where I live, there is a specialized jazz dance school with incredible instructors and teachers who actually do know a lot about the history. And that's actually where I've learned a lot of the information I shared today is from that school. But when you go into more community-based dance studios, smaller dance studios that are in Calgary or in any area, a lot of these teachers actually don't really go through formal training. They don't go through a university program where they would gain knowledge like this. And so it really comes down to who who should be able to kind of teach these subjects. Because in Canada, when you think if a teacher, if you want to become a teacher, you go to school and then you get a job, and that's kind of the only way to be able to teach, at least in a public school. But that's not the same case if you want to be a dance teacher. So if you wanted to be a dance teacher, you literally could just start up your own dance business for your dance studio, offer classes, and then just go right forward with it. You don't have to have any sort of certification or anything like that. So there are organizations that are working towards teachers having to have a special kind of diplomas or certificates to prevent this situation and to be able to have informed dance teachers being able to teach. But it is a slow process. And so this is kind of where there's gaps, right? You have studios that are really focused on the competitive side of things and don't value history or teaching history in their dance studios. They only value having competitive dance classes, and they're marketing their dance classes to families in a way that their kids have to take a lot of dance classes to be able to even compete. So they're really focused on the money. It's really money driven with these more independent dance studios. Not all, there are a few select that are really, really great at what they do, but it's not enough to kind of fill these gaps. So kind of the long-winded answer to your question, I think, is just having more qualified dance teachers who are educated. Education is everything. So being educated in the history so that they can properly inform their students, whether that be in just their regular studies or dance classes. So yeah, I hope that answered your question, but all comes
So,
down
Maddy,
to
would it be fair to say that teaching dance ahistorically is a form of cultural violence? Would that be very out of the um, line of thought?
no, definitely not. Like, I think it definitely fits within this. Whether it's kind of unintentional or hasn't been thought about, it's definitely ended up that way where people, for instance, I've known about people who watch a YouTube video on Bollywood dancing, let's say. They watch a couple videos and then they go and offer classes saying that, oh, I'm an expert in Bollywood, come take my class. And you would, as a person who's never taken Bollywood, you show up and you're like, okay, this is fun. This seems like what Bollywood is. But really, do they have any qualification? Do they know anything about the history of Bollywood or anything like that? So it definitely, I agree. Yes, it's definitely culturally insensitive in that way, for sure.
Rujda, you have a question.
Yeah, I loved your presentation and I knew I would. I was waiting for this day since like last week since we've started talking. So anyway, thank you so much again. I learned a lot. I actually did some swing dance in Quebec when I was there for an exchange, and it's super hard. It looks easy, but it's not.
No, it is very challenging.
Yeah, so wow. And you said you do that, right? Because you're a dancer.
Yeah, I
You
do. Within jazz, I don't really specialize in swing, but I have taken a few classes for sure. But yeah, it is challenging. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
my question was actually from the cultural point of view. I was
Yeah.
just wondering, like, it can be a little personal too. It's up to you if you want to answer it or not. Totally, I respect that if you don't. But my question is, what made you was it the dance that you like because you started dancing and then you were aware that, you know what, this dance is not from my people, it's actually from this African continent, and I should respect it because, you know, originally it is from there? Or was it because you maybe you had a friend who was Black and they talked about it and you understand it from their point of view too? Like, where did this awareness in you come from that I need to talk about this, even though a lot of, like you said, like the other dance teachers who are doing it for money, they're not talking about it? But what is that, like, what drives you to talk about the history, and why do you think it's appropriate to do that?
For sure. Yeah, thanks. That's a great question as well. So I grew up dancing in a dance studio that was very heavily focused on Western forms of dance, so ballet mainly. I did mainly ballet, and then the jazz dance school that I was talking about earlier. I also took a few classes from them, and they had classes of all sorts, and they had very great instructors that knew the history, and they really took pride in having quality instructors. And so I started taking a few classes with them at the same time, and I was noticing kind of the differences I was noticing, like, my instructors at my dance studio would never kind of talk about that, because I also took jazz at my dance studio, but it was the pop jazz style. And so I was going back and forth these two studios, or these two studios, you could call it, where I was experiencing vernacular jazz, and then on the other hand, experiencing pop jazz. And I was really confused. I was like, these are the same thing. What are they? And so then I just started asking questions at the place. It's called Decidedly Jazz Dance Works in Calgary. And so I started talking to those instructors and getting to know more information. And this was kind of throughout high school, I was kind of wondering. And so I started to kind of gain just a little bit of information on the background of jazz dance, while also still taking pop jazz dance classes at my regular studio. And then it was just kind of circling around throughout high school, and then I got into university, and one of my professors, Michelle Moss, she is very involved in jazz dance, and she was actually one of the founders of that jazz dance school, Decidedly Jazz Dance. So she taught all of my jazz classes, and again was very well versed in the history, and really stressed the importance of understanding the history in these classes that I was taking. And so a lot of my knowledge that I've learned today and my awareness, I actually learned from her and through her classes. And so what I really loved about her classes was they weren't just dancing. She would include readings you had to do. She would include PowerPoints that we would listen to at the other half of the class. And so we would get that physical dance instruction, but then we would also have the history to tie the two together, to understand why are we dancing these traditional movements, things like that. So that's kind of where they both connected for me. And then I started to really understand and appreciate the history behind it. And it also started to click for me too, because all throughout high school, I was also really involved in jazz music, in the music program. And so my band teacher was also incredible at giving us kind of facts about history. It was more kind of here and there. It wasn't so concentrated, but I had that general understanding, and he would bring in professional jazz musicians from New York, and we would learn from them. And then they would have experiences in the history around jazz to share with us as well. So it was just kind of an accumulation of information, I guess, through my experiences of participating in the arts and through music and dance, that I've kind of, gained all this knowledge and appreciation for it. So I hope that answered your question. It was kind of all over
I
the
have
place.
a little bit to like add to that.
Yeah.
Or ask, I guess, like while you were answering my question, I had another question. Sorry, you know me. You've been in the class with me. So I'm sorry. I was wondering, so were those people from Africa, like they were African Americans, or were they white people who were actually well versed on the history, or were they people actually who came from Africa and they have their ancestors who were maybe connected with the slavery or whatever?
Sorry, yes, I should have added that. So my professor, Michelle Moss at the university, I believe she's half Jamaican, half English, but she was born in Canada. Her father's from Jamaica and her mom was from England. So yes, she does definitely have that experience as well. And then in terms of my band teacher, he was white, but he did bring in a lot of professional jazz musicians who were from New York, and they were also Black as well. So they, not necessarily from Africa, but they had those the roots and the connection to it all. So yeah, through that experience, I've also had very knowledgeable teachers as well who are white and have grown up in Calgary, Alberta, but they have applied themselves and are obviously still continuously learning on the topic. But I would consider them to be also mentors in this as well, just because of their education that they've gone through. Yeah, so I hope that also answers your question, but yeah.
I was hoping that if you and I and Rushta, and if you have any, so basically we just have finished talking about very elementarily transatlantic, slavery. We just have started talking about that, how incredibly important for our students to learn. That's where we started. That's where we started. So one of the things that I want to add here is, so you and I want to ask a couple of questions. I know these students will ask 6 months down the road.
That's a lot to take in.
Yeah, they will ask these questions which they're not asking, which I know from, because we both have similar cultural, the students and I come from similar areas, similar socioeconomic background, and what have you.
Yeah.
One of the things that, what you said, that learning about jazz history is incredibly important, but it happened to you almost like not in a very systematic, structural way. You came to know from here and there. So in the areas of research, I'm saying this fancy word to all the students, is that the word is epistemic violence, that when knowledge is used to cause violence, the production and dissemination of knowledge. So the politics of what gets to syllabus, the politics of which history to be taught. Like, for instance, I'm sure that you completing high school in Canada, you know very well that in your high school, you are not very actively taught the history of indigenous, the colonial cruelty. You actively have not been taught the history of slavery. You actively have not been taught that Canada's attitude towards South Asian people in 1914, when the ship came to British Columbia, during the First World War, the British Columbia, the Parliament had to be convened, and the thing is, mind you, that we have been a British colony for over 200 years. We have fought for the Brits. We have died for the Brits. We have fallen for the Brits. But when we came to the shores of Canada, very bluntly, they did not want to accept us. Just 3 weeks ago, a Muslim family was brutally murdered. What was their crime? Well, they were Muslims, right? So all of that. So I want to say it unapologetically, and I hope that you understand that I may sound at times intense or coming from a place of pain, but you understand that, how that trauma exists when you understand your history. And one of the terms that I have taught these students already is that the expression is ahistorical, is that getting to know something as if they don't have a history is a form of violence. It's a form of psychic colonization. It's a form of, like I often tell them, that Einstein wouldn't have gotten a Nobel Prize had it not been similarly the contribution of a Bengali mathematician. We know about Einstein, but we don't know about that, scientist. We don't know that it was the Bengali mathematician's work based on whose work. 5 white scientists have gotten Nobel Prize. We don't know that. So I want to add to that, what you do not know, it's not it's an accidental thing. It's very strategic and structural and built in it to invisibilize history. That's one. You have talked about something incredibly important, that the history of jazz and how, and I want to add the Bengali poem that you all know, and I'm going to translate for Maddy in a bit. তোমরা সবাই বাংলায় কবিতাটা জানো। কবিতাটা কি? যে খোকা ঘুমালো, পাড়া জোড়ালো, বর্গি এলো দেশে, বুলবুলিতে ধান খেয়েছে, খাজনা দিব কিসে। এই যে কবিতাটা, এই কবিতাটার যে ব্রিটিশ কলোনিয়াল হিস্ট্রি, যখন আমরা ব্রিটিশ শাসনের আন্ডারে ছিলাম, আমরা যদি বলতাম যে আমাদের ধান, আমাদের ফসল ব্রিটিশরা জোর করে এসে নিয়ে যাচ্ছে, আমাদেরকে ধান চাষ করতে দিচ্ছে না, আমরা না খেয়ে মারা যাচ্ছি, আমাদেরকে নীল চাষ করতে বাধ্য করছে, এই কথাগুলো কিন্তু আমরা বলতে পারতাম না। এই জন্য কবিরা কি করেছেন, তাদের কবিতার মধ্যে এই সেমান্টিক কোডিং করে গেছেন যে বুলবুলিতে ধান খেয়েছে। বুলবুলিতে ধান খাবে কেন? পাখি ধান খেলে কি খাজনা দেওয়ার কোনো পথ থাকে না? যাতে করে বলা যায়। So Maddy, what I just said, that there is a poem written during the British colonial, British in India, is that where the poem goes like this, is that, I can't pay taxes because the birds have eaten all the rice, all the paddy. So basically at that time, if the farmers would say that, well, the Brits are coming and taking all our rice, the Brits are compelling us to produce indigo, not rice, because they want to sell indigo, the British colonial cruel rule would be brutal. And I have already talked with our students, is that the British colonial rule was so cruel that they did not even spare a child from hanging because that child resisted. And this is why you from Canada and these kids from Bangladesh together can collaborate to know your history together, is that how the oppressor and the oppressed, the history will not spare you if you do not go back to the root to understand that how the knowledge-based violence continues to happen. In Bangladesh today, we learn that Columbus was a discoverer. He was a hero. That's what I grew up studying. If you ask most kids in Bangladesh, they'll continue learning it. My master's research, graduate research in Canada, was epistemic violence. I question the literacy practices in Bangladesh, both in Bengali medium and English medium. The history that we teach continues to be colonial. Because in 1834, the British Viceroy of India gave a very notable speech in British Parliament where he said, mind you, that 30,000 British officers were controlling and brutalizing cruelly 300 million brown people. So they needed to create a group of collaborators. Like, just, a couple of weeks ago when the remains of 215 indigenous children's bodies were found in a British Columbia school, and we are shocked. So when in Canada, Justice Sinclair said that this is a cultural genocide, we need to understand what happened in Canada, what happened in America, and what happened in Bangladesh. They are connected. And that is why we start our discussion with map. We start our discussions that why this part of the world is considered to be first world. When I teach, when I work, whether it is as a teaching assistant or as a sessional instructor, I tell my students that I want you to know my name clearly. Like just how in the Black Lives Matter movement, we hear, again, I'm not comparing at all. I am not comparing at all. One of the things that we hear is that say her name, say his name, say the name who have been brutally murdered, say the names of indigenous women who continues to be murdered and they go on missing. I know I'm using a lot of academic language, which all of these students do not understand yet, but this is a recorded class. And that's what I'm saying to you is that 6 months, 1 year down the road, when they will remember their friend Maddy came and presented, they will understand at that time a lot more than what they understand right now. But I often say is that when you hear somebody speak English and you automatically, feel inferior because you can't speak English like them. When millions of immigrants in Canada and America, we suffer, the systemic violence, symbolic violence, because we speak English idiosyncratically, which is not Canadian enough, which is not American enough, which is not British enough. When from Bangladesh we come and speak English here, we have an accent. But my friend, if somebody comes from France and speak English, that is very attractive and sexy, that is exotic. But when we speak English, that is desi. So there are violence underneath this apparently naive interpretation of social interaction. And your interest in cultural anthropology, your interest in dance, perhaps will take you down that rabbit hole. Perhaps sometimes it will exist in your mind like a splinter that will not let you sleep at night, that you will go through torment, intellectual, philosophical, existential, will probably send you through depression. But I invite you, Maddy, if you stick to the path, if you stick to be unapologetically courageous and stick to, the path with discomfort, with the unknown, I tell you that you will go through transformation that my words cannot possibly, explain. So the idea of jazz being performed in North America, like when you hear Billie Holiday, the strange fruit, I don't think that my eyes would get wet or I sometimes break in tears uncontrollably if I did not know the history of, slavery. But when I listen to Billie Holiday without knowing the history, when I hear the song of Adam and Devil, there's a famous music composition, this white musician and this black musician, that together go in a journey. It's crazy. There's a documentary on that in Netflix. It will take you down the rabbit hole. But at the same time, I often quote Arundhati Roy, a very notable Indian author, who says, never to worship power, but always to love courage. Never to look away from the ugly, despicable brutality that happens because of my own comfort. Oh, I don't want to know that. I don't want to know that. I have heard discussions working as a, graduate teaching assistant or as an instructor is that, oh, we don't want to teach our white undergraduate students the brutal murder of Rena Virk in British Columbia because these kids are only in their undergraduate first year and second year. Their mind is too fragile. And who are saying this? Mostly white professors. And mind you, at that time, I was an international student. My immigration was not done. But you see, I write in pain. And now that I have completed my immigration here, now that I don't have to worry about my visa, that I'll have to go back, I say these things unapologetically. I make this my political journey and I say, knowledge is fundamentally political. So with that rant and my, you can hear the agony in my interpretation, in my narrative. Do you think in Canadian context and in American context, when somebody knows ballet, that proper elite posture and form and, Jennifer has gone to ballet and she has earned that award. But when you listen to Tupac, when you listen to Kendrick Lamar, when Kendrick Lamar is saying how much $1 really cost, right? and he's swearing. He's not fearing to drop the F-bomb.
Mhm.
That's where the white, privileged, protected upper class can say, oh, that's too inappropriate. Oh, that's the black angry woman who is always black, angry, right? But delegitimizing the experiences they live, right? You
Sure.
as an aspiring dancer and you as an aspiring anthropologist, what do you think about it? Is that understanding which culture gets ghettoized, which culture gets a particular label, and which culture gets the label of being elite?
Right. That's a big question. Yeah. Um, well, I believe like labels just create division, in my opinion, in some cases, obviously. Um, and as a white person, yeah, I definitely see that happening. I mean, it's definitely very apparent in the dance world for sure. If I'm speaking in a dance context per se, um, even jazz dance compared to contemporary dance, because contemporary dance is a whole other genre as well of dance. You can see the systematic difference as well in, let's say, even my university program. And if you look at dance university programs across Canada, a lot of them are contemporary based, and that is the focus. Whereas jazz dance, for me, I can't major in jazz dance. I can only major in contemporary dance. And so that's what I'm doing. But jazz dance for me is only an option. I only can take 4 classes in my whole degree in jazz dance. Whereas my contemporary classes, I take a class every single semester for 4 years. And so I tried looking for a university that offered Bachelor of Fine Arts in jazz dance in Canada, because that's where I wanted to stay. And there's just no offerings in that, it's like it's the system that's set up, right? It's how do we break that system? How do we incorporate and level out these playing fields here so that one isn't better than the other and they're both valid? And yeah, I'm not saying you shouldn't be able to major in ballet or contemporary, but it's these forms that have been historically beaten down or not respected or have been discriminated against, such as jazz dance or hip hop. There's nowhere you can get a degree in hip hop. Haven't heard of a place that you can get a degree in hip hop. So for me, a lot of my focus and my train of thought recently has been, what are we offering in our education programs? I actually wrote a paper last semester on where is our Indigenous education on dance? I only once in my degree so far had a conversation in a class that lasted probably around 20 minutes around Indigenous dance. And my prof couldn't really speak on it because there wasn't really, like, they weren't qualified. And yeah, there was just no awareness. And I mean, Indigenous dance is different in the fact that, yes, you definitely can easily appropriate it if not done the correct way. But I feel that that has been a barrier and an excuse to not incorporate it into our education systems. And so that has been on my forefront of thinking about anthropology, culture, dance, is our program offerings. Because if you want to be qualified as a dance teacher, you have to, well, you don't have to, but if you personally want to be qualified enough to feel that you can teach properly with the history and knowledge that you should have as a dance teacher, you want to go to a university. And so that's why I chose to do that. But when you look at the program offerings, it's really slim pickings if you want to stay within Canada. I mean, in the US, I can't really speak much to it. I'm sure I've heard of more specialized jazz programs, but even those ones aren't necessarily truly built on authentic history either. A lot of it is commercialized in Broadway, and you can do a ton of different conservatory diploma programs in Broadway and commercialized dance. But if you're looking for more of a kind of authentic, scholarly kind of experience in a dance form other than ballet or contemporary or modern dance, it's very difficult to find a program. So one of my kind of thoughts, kind of aspirations for right now is to be able to create kind of a multicultural dance program or something where each dance style stands on its own and you can take a degree in that dance style because it's just nowhere to be found. And so in my paper, I discussed, I actually researched how many different public schools even incorporate Indigenous dance, Canadian Indigenous dance into their curriculum. And it's literally nowhere to be found. There's a couple places where they mention powwows or something like that, which is a type of dance that Indigenous people practice in Canada, but there's no really program for it. There's no education on it. And it's really unfortunate because that is the dance of Canada. It's literally Canada's dance and nobody knows about it. So that's really what kind of gets me going, I guess, and talking about this. And I've been talking with some of my professors about this. But when I presented my paper last semester, it was in front of the whole faculty and everything, I really didn't get much response to it, which was interesting as well. I got more of a response from my mentor, who is half Jamaican, and then the rest of the faculty is white. So there you go. So that's kind of what I've experienced so far, and that's where I want to head as someone who does have privilege in maybe being able to get these topics going and incorporating more diverse people into the conversation to get these topics out there. But yeah, that's been my experience so far and my interests. I really wish I was doing a degree in jazz dance, but yeah, that'll have to come, right? So
yeah. And also if you think about it, is that if Rushda or let's say Cynthia or any of these students here, Rushda is now obviously like me, she's also an immigrant and she has the rights like I do. But if any of the students, international students, if they come here, so you can call it, it's a kind of knowledge invisibilization. Is that how one knowledge? It's not the case that there are no Indigenous dancers, but if you are to welcome the Indigenous dancer at the universities, you'll have to change the structure. And if the structure needs to be changed, means the structure that has been serving the interest of white people for the past 600 years, you don't want that. You don't want that. And there, one of the other danger is that when you go into that space, you better know your battle. Because you see, Maddy, dare I say, you can go to some places because you're a white woman, you can ask a stark question, difficult question, and probably come out of that unscathed.
Yeah.
But might not be the same experience if it is done by somebody else. I think Naim has a question.
I have this very short question for Maddy. Like, as you mentioned, jazz basically came from the Vernacular Jazz, which emerged like in the early 90s, I guess, 1900s. So I want to know about the timeline. And you also explained about the pop dance, like pop jazz. So basically during or before the Second World War, I think jazz was influenced by ballet and other classical techniques of modern dance and other things. So when was this pop or pop jazz or commercial jazz or commercially the selling jazz that you were mentioning started and came out as a mainstream jazz form?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. Thank you. So off the top of my head, I don't know if numbers are super correct, but from remembering from one of my dance lectures, in the 90s, there was a whole movement of being kind of called a flexible dancer, and not in the sense that you're like flexible physically, but that you are able to cater to multiple different styles of dance. So not only do you know jazz dance, but you know ballet, you know modern. And this was to cater to kind of capitalism, if you want to say, like this selling of dance and having, if you are a choreographer or a director, who are you going to hire? The person that can do 6 different styles of dance or a person that can do 1? And so within this kind of period of time in the 90s where people were seeking out dancers to be able to cater to multiple different styles, pop jazz kind of came out of that and was kind of catering to more of the showy entertainment style of performance. You know, like award shows or let's say, I don't know, like in New York, you know how they have just different shows that they put on, like for entertainment purposes, for people to come buy the tickets to come see you perform. So not only was it on a level of choreographers seeking out dancers who are able to do multiple different styles, it's like the public that are wanting to see this style of dance, this popular style of dance. So pop jazz as in popular. So they want to see this hybrid of jazz dance and make it showy. And so when we watched the pop jazz video, it was very much like structured lines, very showy, very kind of competitive. And that was what was appealing and still kind of is to this day. When you watch an award show online or something, it's a show. You're there to be entertained. And so I think that's kind of where pop jazz has morphed into a little bit, in being able to take those movements from authentic jazz, vernacular jazz, and apply them to what they need right now for profit. So that's kind of my general understanding of it right now from what I've learned in my lectures and things like that. But I think it really morphed to be able to serve the people and please the people, if that makes sense.
I also want to add here that one of the things that we need to be incredibly mindful that has pretty much happened to any. So if you think about the history of jazz or blues, they're not just music. They were the art for resistance. Yeah. These form of art grew out of social movement. When you hear blues, you can understand that what does it mean to be a Black person in America? When you hear Nina Simone, I mean, if you listen to her, you will understand that pain. You will understand that, oh, what must have possibly happened? But whenever any form of art that becomes a potential tool for resistance, think about the whole idea of rap music. It was born out of the fact that rappers were using their language, quote unquote, their form of language, to express their forms of oppression. But now, over the years, if you see the capitalistic co-option, or I say commodification, I know these words they will learn pretty soon, that commodification of that art, that the potential to resist dies down. That potential energy, that edginess, that sharpness that can act, what happens that it takes out that potence out of that. And once that potence is taken out of that, it remains as a hollow shell that fakely and unfairly, and again, that's where I see knowledge-based violence, that's, oh, this is, Black music, or this is music from Latin America, but the version that brings money, but the version that actually gives up the original purpose why it started. Blues, jazz, these forms of music were social movement. They were not just music. When you hear the song that brothers, revolution will not be televised. It's just not a song. It is not just a song. When Eric Garner was brutally murdered, when the song came out, I Can't Breathe, it's not just a song. It's documenting history. When Emmett Till was murdered, when Trayvon Martin was murdered, why? Why did that happen? But then, very soon, that potence, because art has the capacity to evoke emotion out of you, and that brings social transformation. And that's where, Maddy, I think, your commitment, your intellectual integrity, your commitment to know, do whatever you can to uphold the value of this art. And like I said, is that, I mean, a lot of white women have played a lot of important roles being a really badass ally. They have, they have. At least,
Mhm.
a white woman cannot be so easily be dispensable like the way it can be when it is a black woman, or, an indigenous woman, or, people of color. But that doesn't mean that, white women do not bear the brunt of capitalistic, patriarchal, toxic, structure. Now, this is where I say, remember, Rushdu, we often say the word interconnectedness. Our discussion started with jazz, but now you see it's connected to history, politics, economy, technology, how things are run. When Maddy is saying, if you go to YouTube, see which videos are popular. If you see this, show, these are connected. These are connected. Go on, Rusda. I think you had a question.
I didn't have a question. I just wanted to add to something that you were saying. You were talking about how certain artists, especially like rappers, and I still am a little bit less now, but I used to be a huge Eminem fan. I don't know how many people here listen to Eminem, but I just living in Bangladesh, I didn't understand the life in America, right? He was from Detroit, and there, as a white kid, as a white person growing up in a black neighborhood, he literally, like, he was that odd one who didn't live a white life. Like everyone else, like all of his friends, like where like the whole D12 band, if you guys know, like Dr. Dre and everyone, their friends, like you will see Eminem has like all black friends, and he was like the odd white kid who was also living in that trailer park or slum or whatever area, like very very like poverty ridden, and all that. And then in his songs, like he actually says, like, that's why I honestly, I'm so proud of like University of Calgary Arts Department for having Eminem's biography on the display. Like I was so happy because like in his songs he talks about, like, oh, all the cool, all the kids think, all the white kids think that I'm so cool. Like I talk about pistol, I talk about murders and everything, and they think okay, I'm just gonna say his words, I'm sorry for swearing. They think this shit's cool, but you hold a pistol and it can teach you hate. And like he talks about all these things, so you can tell that he's protesting. He's saying that, guys, wake up. I'm not trying to tell you that just because I'm holding a gun, it's not because it's cool. That's what the marketer is making it to be. He can't say that because he has this like I wouldn't say a blindfold, but for his mouth, like it's shut, right? He has a certain label and he's under a certain authority. He can't say everything on the radio. And he says, like, if you listen to Eminem, he would say that, yeah, like they don't let me go on radios anymore. They don't let me talk on TV shows anymore. There's a reason, because he's always protesting about like how bad the system is in America. And there's actually a song called White America, where he talks about how there's like white privileges and they have like certain, like racism or classism and all these things. And anyone, like just any hip-hop artist or like rappers, if you listen to it closely, instead of trying to be all cool and all these things, like when Feroz said that there's another whoever's trying to control this, like capitalism kings, if you will, or whoever's behind this, the untouchables or the Illuminati or whatever you want to call them, they're trying to make it a cool thing, or like it's for showbiz, like it's a performance, it's not real, don't pay attention. They're like distracting you with all these things, whereas the artists themselves are trying to like wake people up. They're like, hey, look what's happening in my town. My mom was so poor that we had to have pills for breakfast or dinner. She didn't have money to buy food. And those are the things that he's talking about. But on the TV, they're saying, yeah, he talks about drugs and pills and you know, just making him look bad. Same with Michael Jackson. Like, he tried to warn everyone how much racism there was. Like, if you listen to the song They Don't Care About Us, all I want to say that they don't really care about us. Like, he tries to put energy and all these things to make people listen to him. He tries to put whatever he can, but all of his songs are talking about protest, about the earth, about capitalism, about racism. So yeah, sorry, I got emotional here, but yeah, it's very dear to me.
You're muted. You're muted.
You're just muted
You're
still.
muted. You have done it.
Yeah, you're muted.
Sorry. Okay. So I just did a mistake when I said that the documentary on the Netflix, the collaboration between a white musician and a black musician is called Adam and Satan. It's a brilliant, brilliant documentary where, you know, when you listen to their band, I mean, this guy, this white guy, he's actually an English professor. He drops his Ivy League graduation degrees and everything. He goes to lives with, you know, goes to the black part of the New York and listens to the song and tries to understand, and it's very it's very tough. And then also, if you listen to MIA, the Sri Lankan British musician Matangi, is that when you listen to the song Paper Plane, you know, when you listen to the song, you know, when she's protesting the world policy towards refugee, and I have made list for this class, you know, songs, is that where do you think this song came from? When you listen to Pink Floyd's song We Don't Need No, you know, Education, you know, that's where you learn the politics of education, right? So Maddy, once again, I really want to thank you very much for your wonderful presentation, and I hope that, you know, you enjoyed it, and you know, you have probably, you know, Rushda and I went on a rant, but you understand that where we come from.
Yeah, oh, definitely. It's been a pleasure. It's been so great listening to all different perspectives and everything. I've learned a lot myself. So thank you for having me.
And we look forward to you joining us whenever time permits you,
Yes, I would love
and anytime whenever you can. So this is the time when we meet around, like, you know, your time in Alberta right now, it's I think 8 o'clock right now.
Oh yeah, it's almost 10 to 9. Yeah.
Okay. So around 9 exactly. So do you folks have any question for Maddy before we wrap up? Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you again.
Maddy, thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to, you know, have you as often as you can, you know, to in our class and discuss and, you know, learn from each other. And everybody, you know, this recording is going to be in our, you know, group, and once I download from Zoom server, I'm going to upload it. And I know that I've said a lot of things that you won't understand it now, but you'll understand down the road. I mean, Ruzda is shaking her head because, well, Ruzda understands. Ruzda, I mean, please conclude the class, and then, you know, we'll stop recording.
Again, thank you so much, Maddy. Like, I can't thank you enough for joining us, because this class, I'm gonna be a fangirl, because I am of this school, and I don't know how long we've been talking about this school for. So yeah, thank you so much. This class gives me a lot of spiritual wealth, and you probably know what that means. And you can see, like, how we talk about social issues just openly like this with anyone and everyone, and they're just thinkers from everywhere in the world. Like, today it's you, maybe another day it's another person from India, and we did have Dr. Sangeeta Rai from India, right? So like, every time, like, if you join us another day, you will see different people, like even more like scholars or other people just sharing their view of the world. And like, I love this school so much, because like, at the end of the day, we're all humans. And that's what it's about. It's about the oneness, because there's so much discrimination between like different groups, because we let ourselves have different identities other than human beings. We are Muslims. we are indigenous, we're white, we're black, like all these things. But at the end of the day, we all come down to one, you know, just humans and nature. And when I do this class, it's so wholesome. Like Feroz said just now, he said that interconnectedness, right? Like how everything connects at the end and we see the bigger picture. I don't know about you guys, but like it just fills my heart with like spiritual wealth, because like I'm like, oh my god, like I can see so many different perspectives at the same time. And you don't think like that because you're just you and you're limited in your sphere, right? You can't go out of your horizon of knowledge and get other perspectives. That's why I love this school, and I'm so happy that you were here and you put so much effort. Yeah, guys, please thank Maddy, because like I'm just gonna tell you a little bit of the backstory of it. So we've been talking for like a week now about this whole presentation, and she was so excited and she was nervous and she's like, oh my god, do I have to a little bit more background, because we were in this class where we were taught like anthropology, cultural anthropology, where we talked about different cultures, right? And we talk about how in different cultures, different things are like the same thing can be like disrespectful in another culture. And Maddy, being such a nice person, she was like asking me, she's like, should I have any consideration before I come to your class? Because I'm not like, I really want to make sure I'm respectful to all the people in the class. And that means a lot. And I feel like that is the objective of this class, you know, bringing us together, like caring about each other and thinking about these things that we don't usually. So yeah.
Awesome. With that positive note and vibe, I wish you in Bangladesh you have a wonderful day, and in Canada, Rushda and Maddy, you have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
Stay safe, take care. I mean, I got my second shot of vaccine today, and I'm not feeling very well, but I was very happy, seeing you here, and seeing. And as I say this to Rushda all the time, that you participate an hour and two here, you will be pumped for a long time. So this is the fuel that you get. So have a wonderful evening, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.